be glad in it. It is a pleasure to see everybody this morning, especially our visitors. It's always a pleasure to have them visiting with us. Researching sermons for this week, I came up with two, and the more I studied them and elaborated on them, I realized I could turn those into series, and so I put those aside. And then I came across this one that I preached back in 2000, 26 years ago, when I was over in Kashmir. And it was fitting, I thought, for today. The reason being, if you look at that top picture in the top right-hand corner, that was probably one of the last pictures ever taken of Mount St. Helens in her beauty before tomorrow. The picture below was taken 4 months afterwards. May 17th, of course, was today. Tomorrow, May 18th, is when Mount St. Helens blew. So I thought it was fitting that we talk about it today. Why in the world do we want to talk about that? Hang with me. Mount St. Helens, of course, is located in the southwest corner of Washington State, or maybe straight across if you looked at it on a map. I don't know if any of you have ever had the opportunity to go and tour Mount St. Helens before or afterwards. Kathy and I went there when I was preaching in Kashmir 26 years ago, and we camped along the southern rim. We went to Cougar and then circled around Mount St. Helens and toured it. When you come around from the south, you know, you can see the backside of the mountain, and she looks normal. You know, she looks okay. But then when you come circle around on the east side, and you circle way up above it, and you come back down, it's hidden from view because of the lush forest and the trees and everything. And then when you get closer and you pull up on this little hillside, and there's a pull out to where you can see it, and you get out, and the bottom picture is what you see. Just pure devastation. You can see where the top is gone. And I'm sure we've all seen videos or camera shots that show the procedure, you know, of how she blew and how it blew out the northern side, and the whole hillside just collapsed. And that's what I want to talk about this morning. Excuse me. She's hiding all of her secrets. Like I said, the road pops up out of the trees, and you don't see it until you get close to it. Kind of reminded me of when we went to see the Grand Canyon. You don't see the Grand Canyon until you walk up the trail to its rim. And you see pictures of the Grand Canyon, and it's gorgeous and everything, but until you walk up there by yourself and you look over that rim and see the beauty of the Grand Canyon, and it literally took my breath away. You see pictures like this of Mount St. Helens, but until you walk up there and you see it in person, the pure devastation that occurred 46 years ago is unbelievable and hard to understand. It's standing now at 8,900 feet. Steam is still visible, spewing out of its crater. But beyond you is this thick, rich, dense forest behind you. But ahead of you, there is nothing. You know, it's like two different things. There are a few scattered poles sticking up out of the ground in front of you. These poles are what is left of the lush green forest that covered this mountain. And it might be hard to see it in this top view, but there you can see the green line that used to exist on the bottom of Mount St. Helens. As you get closer, you notice that all of these naked trees are laid down, and they're all, millions of them, they're all pointing in the same direction. And if you took and drew a line from each of these down trees, they all point back to Mount St. Helens. You know, when it exploded and the shock wave went out, all the trees fell down, pointing away from Mount St. Helens. And we'll look at a couple of pictures of this in a minute. From Mount St. Helens, ground zero, out 6 miles, there's nothing. All the trees are gone. The greenery is gone. It's all replaced with gray and ash. Now, to give you an idea of what that represents, if you drive this morning from the church building, go down Highway 2, turn right onto Country Homes Boulevard, and when you come to Wall Street, that's 6 miles. So imagine everything from here to that Wall Street intersection in a radius. Everything is gone. Everything is knocked over. You can see that far. That's what it looked like at Mount St. Helens. For 6 miles, in an instant, everything was gone. That is called the dead zone. Even then, when we were there 20 years later, there's still no vegetation to speak of. Let me put that, So you understand that there's nothing there. It's a dead zone. There's nothing, no vegetation, no animals, no nothing. It's just gray because of the ash. In the beginning, Genesis 1, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. The area north of Mount St. Helens after the blast was a wasteland. Everything in its blast zone was killed, stripped of its life in an instant. Nothing was green. Everything was gray from the ash covering it, locking over the gray land that you would think of would be beautiful. But to me, it reminded of the beginning, as we read here in Genesis 1. In the beginning, when there was no form or void. But it wasn't desolate. There was life. You just couldn't see it. God was there, hovering over the face of this devastated land, looking down onto what he had just created. This blank, gray canvas where he knew what was going to happen next. He was going to give the world a lesson in creation. The north side of Mount St. Helens was all but total devastation. And you can see here in these pictures the trees, hopefully, of how they are all lined up in one direction, pointing in one direction, pointing to Mount St. Helens. Going down to verse 11, and God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind on the earth." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seeds according to their own kinds, and trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its own kind. And God saw that it was good. It was fascinating to see 20 years after the destruction how God was recreating the landscape. I remember back to 2000 when the scientists and the ecologists and whoever was involved, that they wanted to take a section of this devastation and not touch it. That whole area belonged to a logging company, and they lost billions of dollars because they could not repurpose those trees that had been blown down because of the ash that was on them. It was like it mixed with water, and it became like cement. We went and visited a visitation site, and they had recreated in there a section of what it looked like. And they were showing that, I think, like 3 or 4 inches of ash on these trees that had fallen over with the rain had turned to cement. And so the loggers couldn't go out there and cut the logs and use them because they had to bust through the cement first. So it made it all useless. okay? But it wasn't useless to God. We saw a documentary not too long after going there, and it was talking about how they wanted to take a section of land and just leave it alone. Don't touch it, don't reseed it, don't plant trees, and just see how Mother Earth would recover. And little did they know the problems that was going to cause. And we're going to get into that. Because you see, there was nothing there. No green, no plants, no animals, no insects. It had all been blown away. It had all been killed in an instant. It was like we were back to the creation, to an earth without form and void. Dropping down to verse 24. And God said, the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things, and beasts of the earth according to their kinds. And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. 20 years later in this visitation center, they had pictures and everything and videos showing how this section that they had left alone was starting to come back to life. That there was plants sprouting up. There was flowers blooming. There was insects coming in, which brought in birds, which brought in other game, which brought in the elk and the deer. And it was starting to thrive again without man's intervention. And that was hard for them to swallow. When Mount St. Helens erupted, the whole north face of it fell off and went into Spirit Lake. The force of the mudslide was so strong that it pushed the water of the lake. The mud slide down and everything, and the trees sliding down, pushed the water, everything out of the lake and up to the mountainside beside it, which all this mud and trees and everything filled 200 to 300 feet of Spirit Lake. And then what little water was left came back into the lake, full of trees, as you can see here. Now, that's what you're seeing down there on the right-hand side of the top corner is Spirit Lake, full of trees. Thousands and thousands of trees clogged it. And you can see that that's a picture of it today with it being open, but you can see the dark area are the trees. And this, again, presented a problem for the scientists because they started looking at the lake and they found out that when the trees got blown down, that it stripped them of all their bark and all their limbs and everything, and all that got pushed down into the bottom of Spirit Lake. And then when the water flowed back, it brought more of that debris into the bottom of Spirit Lake, filling it up, like I said, 200 to 300 feet. That is what they would call peat, okay? And that peat is what forms into coal. And so the scientists were now looking at this and saying, well, maybe it didn't take millions of years for coal to form. When you have an event like this, now they can track it and realize that it's not millions or billions of years, but maybe just thousands. We don't want to look at that. The other thing that happened in Spirit Lake were the trees, all these trees here started getting waterlogged and sinking. Well, they don't sink flat. They sink vertical. And so they sink down into this muck on the bottom. And so if you went down there and you dove around it, it would look like it was an underground forest because all these trees are standing up in the bottom of the lake. Again, scientists didn't like this idea because they had thought that these underground lakes that they had found around the world were, again, millions of years old because they had grown up and then they had filled in, and then that's the reason it was like this. But looking at Mount St. Helens, they found out that could happen in a few years. So again, the scientists didn't like this. But they had to deal with it because that's what was going on. We as creationists like this answer, don't we? Because if you flip over through, a few pages, Genesis 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, and you read about the flood and what happened and how it was totally engulfed in water, and you think about all the forest in the world and all the valleys that all of a sudden got filled up and all these trees that fell, it could have created these coal beds and these standing forests that are buried and all this that they were claiming, scientists were claiming, took millions of years to make. Mount St. Helens disproved all of that and that it could happen in one day. And then through the years, you get this sedimentation and you get this coal and you get these standing forests that are underwater. This is what Mount St. Helens looks like today. It is not dead. It is not gray. It is not uninhabited. The area north of Mount St. Helens is alive and well and showing off creation all over again. And the people can see it and enjoy it. It didn't happen from one single cell. It happened because of God. And it's hard to see in this picture with the lights and everything, but it's green, it's lush, there's flowers, there's animals, there's insects, there's birds. You don't have the big tall trees yet, but they're coming. But you see creation today. Now I was going to stop here, but when I was coming up with the closing, I found a couple of websites I want to share with you. And I know this is the 45th anniversary. I tried changing it to 46 and it looked all weird. So understand we're on the 46th anniversary tomorrow. But God works on His time, to His glory, to His magnification, not ours. God is great and powerful, and He proves this all around us, if only we take the time to look. The first site I want to share with you, I was looking up St. Helens and creation, and I came upon this Mount St. Helens Creation Center that is located in Castle Rock, Washington. They have a museum there that you can tour through. They've got dinosaur exhibits, dinosaur bones, all kinds of other fossils and everything. And they will take you to Mount St. Helens and give you a tour of Mount St. Helens with a creation background. Okay? So that would be something interesting that I would like to take the kids to. The second site that I found is called Creation Ministries International. And I want to give you a quick rundown of what they have on their main page, talking about creation versus evolution, Mount St. Helens, and what they believe in science and how it has disrupted them. When the mountain blew physically, it also blew away false ideas about geology, ideas that were wrong, but has been believed for more than a century. Wrong geological ideas have also led people to wrong ideas about the Bible. And with that, I was talking about, how they say, I should have put it in here and I didn't. It's a timeline through history where Christianity believes it's only 8,000-ish years old, whereas evolutionists believe that it's millions of years old. And so the timelines, the fossil evidence kind of agrees, but the timelines of when that happened doesn't agree. And that's what they're saying here is that Mount St. Helens is disproving their timeline of millions of years. These events that it describes were mythological and did not actually happen. Science. Mount St. Helens changed that. The eruption demonstrated that geology catastrophic events can produce in hours and days geological features previously believed to have taken millions of years. When we see what the volcano did in such a short time, we can better appreciate how the events of Noah's flood formed the much larger geological features on planet Earth, not the millions of billions of years that science believes took. Some of the scientific ideas that were hard hit or how geological layers in the earth were formed in hours, not in millions of years. And again, when you go out and you dig a big hole and you see these layers, okay, they've done that over in Yellowstone. I saw a documentary on that. But, they were saying that it took millions of years to form these different layers. But yet, when they went back to Mount St. Helens and dug through the ash and everything, they were seeing those exact same kind of layers that Mount St. Helens did, in a week. Oh, oops. Sorry about that. Another idea is that the canyons can be carved quickly, as witnessed by the river flowing through the valley with all the debris, rocks, mud, and ash. Okay, so again, looking at these layers that it was forming. Another area of learning was that the landslide created grooves in the rocks in a short period of time. These cuts and grooves look similar to the ones believed to have taken thousands of years from the Ice Age. And I've seen a lot of videos talking about it here, that there used to be a huge ice cap in this area. And when it melted and everything, and the ice flowing down is what carves, when you go down the interstate and you see these carves and these grooves and everything, that was carved by the Ice Age and everything. It took millions of years for that to happen. Well, they found out in, downriver from Mount St. Helens, when that mud flow went down and took everything with it, that it did those same kind of carvings and grooves and everything in the landscape. It only took, a couple of days, a week or whatever to do, not millions of years, and it didn't take any ice. Oops. Also, the forest destruction explained ancient coal and forests, and I already mentioned that, in Spirit Lake. The millions of trees suspected to have been blown over were stripped of their bark and limbs, and that's what causing this peat layer. And again, I've already explained that, so I won't go over it again, as how that is destroying science with the peat and the trees and everything in it. Another area that Mount St. Helens has stepped into is the carbon dating. And again, science use carbon dating to prove that, whatever they have, they carbon date it. And they say, oh, it's millions and billions of years old. But the problem with that is they don't have original material to test at that point of beginning to be able to carbon date it. Okay? You know how old this water bottle is because it's stamped with it when it was made, so you know how old it is. But when you go out and you pick up a rock, you can't say, oh, it's, thousands of years old, because it doesn't have a date on it. Okay? But yet they use this carbon dating because they know how fast something that's carbon-based deteriorates. And so they use that and they backtrack it, but yet you don't know the age of that original material. Okay? So that was the problem that carbon dating has. Well, they went back with Mount St. Helens. We knew that this was all formed, on May 18th. We have a start date. And so 20 years later, 46 years later, when they go back and carbon date it, they get a true carbon dating because they have a May 18th start date. So by doing that, it destroys all this other carbon dating that they use in science to show that the world is millions of years old. Again, Mount St. Helens has taken care of that. This rare opportunity to test radioactive dating on rocks has been, like I said, disproven. And it's another thing that they call daughter isotope. And again, it shows the decay of things, and you have to know the start date in order to disprove it, or to prove it, however you want to look at it. And through Mount St. Helens, they have been able to do that. You can find out more about this creation by reading the first 9 chapters of Genesis again. You can also go to this website that I was talking about, creation.com/learning the lessons on Mount St. Helens, and see what they have learned through Mount St. Helens to prove the creation and disprove evolution and the scientist aspect of how the earth was created. Looking at the pictures of Mount St. Helens before, after, and today reminds me of our Christian walk with Christ. How our life is beautiful when we walk with God, but the devil is lurking inside, just waiting to get out. Then Satan succeeds one day and lets the ugliness of sin out, and it overtakes us. And we lose that beautiful glow of being in Christ, and we turn gray when sin takes over us. Of course, we don't actually turn gray, but the same is true, is we've lost that glow of Christ. When a person becomes or gets to the end of their life, and their body starts running down and everything, they will get that ashen tone. And I think that was a good term for it, being that we're talking about ash, the gray ash, and that, when we start getting old and getting close to the end of our life, we can turn that same ashen gray, lose our color. The same is true when sin has taken us over. We lose that glow of God, and we can get that ashen look. We don't need that in our life. We need Christ in our life. We need God constantly so that our Christian light can shine. I thought this was very interesting in how Mount St. Helens, the scientists wanted to prove evolution, but instead God proved creation. And if you get the chance, go over and see it. I might do it again with the kids just to see what it looks like 46 years later and how much it has grown. But it can show us in Christianity, if you need proof of creation, there it is. We don't have to go far for it. And it was really almost eerie to be facing this beautiful green forest and then turn around and there's nothing, just gray. But yet today is green. If there's anything that we can do for you today, let us know. Let us pray for you. Let us be there for you. Let us help you in your Christian walk. If you haven't put on Christ, the baptistry